in Canada. My father's Canadian. I was in Canada for my grandmother's 100th birthday, great celebrations. And I had left Marina in Austria, where Marina's family are from, for the summer, 8 months pregnant, anticipation, getting ready. The nursery was ready back at home. And I got a call in the middle of the night, basically saying that our child, I didn't know whether it was a son or a daughter at this stage, had been stillborn, and that Marina probably wasn't going to survive. And I could say without doubt it was the worst conversation I've ever had in my life.
Was it from your...
It was actually my father who was luckily... My father, it was just lucky I turned my phone off, and my father had his on. Marina's sister had called him. And that moment, getting on that flight and the door closing and having been warned that Marina might not make it was something I wouldn't wish on anyone. And I think for both Marina and I, going through an experience like that, it kind of brought us closer. But also, this whole notion of stillbirth, I didn't know very much about it up until this point. I didn't realise the impact it can have on you. It's this idea that you can be so emotional, that you can be so distraught about someone you never actually had a chance to meet, but it's the anticipation. Yeah. It was the hope. And it's different. It's different but the same. And Marina must explain this, but miscarriage, and we experience miscarriages as well, is a very different kind of pain. It's a pain nonetheless. But stillbirth is something I can't even begin to explain. And then turning up at the hospital and being told by the nurses, would you like to meet your son? My son? I didn't know it was a son. Do you want to name him? Do you want photographs with him? How are you going to bury him? How are you going to get his body back to England? All these things were so out of my normal control that I could say without doubt it was the hardest experience that we've ever had.
So you were in Canada celebrating your grandmother's 100th, or about to. You're brought back on the plane, and as you're on the plane, the only information you have, and it's not updated during the flight, is your wife may die, and you've lost your child. And at that point, you're in the hospital. Are you conscious of even the crisis you're in?
Well, not for me, because the problem was that I was hemorrhaging and I was under general anaesthetic having a cesarean. So I didn't know until I woke up that I was so ill. But I was in intensive care for about a week. But to be honest, I was in shock. I was numb. I didn't cry for about 3 days, which was baffling. But I think, I was just in shock.
Because you nearly died yourself.
It wasn't actually so much that. It was more that I'd lost my son.
Really?
Yeah, I think the fact that, I teach antenatal classes. I should know about these things. And yet stillbirth was something I'd always shied away from because it was such a horrible idea. And I never knew anyone who'd experienced a stillbirth, let alone contemplated that it might be my reality.
So you need to recover, obviously, your health to deal with the emotional situation. But Willem has been born, effectively. Your son is in the world. He's not alive, but he's there.
We cradled him.
Well, I was going to say, that's a big change, I know, because it happened to friends of mine, that you need to spend time with him. Now, how important was that to you?
Well, I mean, that was...
It was a shock for Ben. Ben wasn't expecting that. My sister's a doctor, and she said to me, Marina, I think this is really important. I think you need to hold him. I think you need to meet him, and I think you need to have pictures with him. And you might not want it now, but it's something that you will be so grateful for afterwards. And she was absolutely right. And I was so lucky that I had someone who I trusted implicitly, that I could just believe. And I think, that is one of the reasons that I talk about it so openly, because, while it is something that no one really does want to think about, it does happen. 15 babies a day are stillborn. And I think even though it's unlikely to happen to you, probably someone in your life will experience that. And for me, in the aftermath, it was how my friends supported me that really helped my recovery. It was about, the language around it, the fact that I found talking about him really therapeutic because I needed to adjust. And I didn't want to feel guilty about mentioning the fact that I'd had a baby, but he wasn't alive.
There are all sorts of really difficult kind of social dynamics that come into this. How do you let everyone know? Do you call everyone and let them know? And what happens when you're suddenly back in England and everyone's like, hey, oh, wow, what did you have? And I actually remember the flight back, we were away in Austria, and we had to fly back, and Marina's stomach was still slightly distended on the flight. And I remember her sitting, I was so nervous about people chatting to us and what they would talk, what they would say. And I saw the girl next to Marina saying, "Oh, how pregnant are you? When are you expecting?" And it killed me. It killed me because I wanted to protect Marina from that, but I couldn't. And I suppose one of the reasons we talk about this so honestly is on many different levels. One is that we're in the public eye, and I feel that you can't sugarcoat your life. I think so many people have this image that they want to project and they want to pretend everything's perfect. No families are perfect. We all have ups and downs. There are imperfections and there are tragedies, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this, to make this something that, because let's be honest, I'm sure lots of people here find this deeply uncomfortable hearing about this and talking about this, and it's not because we want to feel sorry for ourselves, but we want to just make this something that is easier to talk about, because I get emotional still, but I can also actually be very pragmatic and go, do you know what, this just happens. When it happens to someone, just say to them, can I get you some dinner tonight? Can I drop it off on your doorstep? Invite them out for a walk in the park. Don't tiptoe around it.
Yes. Now, what you say is the key problem, isn't it? And I know people then say stupid things like, well, don't worry, you can have another one. But they're well-meaning. Louise, have you experienced anything like this in your life with a friend?
So I have actually. Two of my friends, I don't think they were stillbirth, but they were very late miscarriages. And I know one of the things you've said is that people don't talk about it. It's strange. So this happened to a friend of mine, and she had to give birth naturally to a dead child. And they did the same as you. They took photos and they've named the child. And do you know what? And I feel quite guilty because I've known her for like the best part of my life. And her sister also died at 17 in a very distressing car crash. And I have no problem bringing up her sister's name and talking about Sean. But the boy that she had, I don't talk about it. And I'm like, why don't I? And it's, and I think that's really interesting, is that, I don't talk about Thomas, but I talk about Sean. Isn't that weird?
And I do think the hardest thing, you talked about people saying stuff that can be misconstrued, stuff that can really hurt you. But for me, the most hurtful thing was people not saying anything at all, because it was like they didn't care. Even if someone sent me a text with a kiss on it or just touched my arm and said, "I'm sorry," that meant a great deal. It was the people that said nothing that really hurt me.
That's interesting. Janet?
Well, I think it's to do a lot with the way we still view childbirth and the whole process of having a baby. It's idealised.
It is
the image of
the
mother and the child, and everything's perfect. And people have been getting a lot of stick recently talking about very difficult births. And again, I think be open about it. If the end result is unfortunately not a stillbirth, but if the end result is a live baby, then you are one of the lucky ones, and you have come through something which is still mostly medically safe. I mean, my experience is slightly different. I had a lot of miscarriages. After my third child, I had 10 miscarriages altogether. And I think it is that thing that, although it's difficult to talk about because it happened to me, it happened to everybody in my family too. And we need to say, as you said, this is part of life. It is part of life.
Do you have,
grow beyond it.
When people say, how many children do you have? I'm thinking you must say 3.
Well, you have to make the decision about whether or not you want to have a conversation about a dead baby. And sometimes you do, and sometimes it's just not appropriate. And that's hard because I feel like I'm betraying him. But I think you also have to be pragmatic. And sometimes it's literally just a one-word answer, in which case it's 2. But sometimes, I am more open, but that makes it a lot more difficult because you sort of feel like you're ruining someone else's day.
It's quite a heavy conversation to have with someone. Bringing it up, we're happy having contained conversations. And for me, Everest, it was a big part of the book. Holding my dead son, I made a promise that I would live my life even more brightly. I would do all the things that I had ever dreamed of doing. And it happened to be climbing up Everest, and actually his presence, not in a kind of, not in a little kind of floating baby kind of way, but his presence was really profound there. I kind of never felt alone. I genuinely felt like he was there, just keeping a little eye on me. And Marina is the true hero in all this. Teaches antenatal classes. You've helped bring in thousands of babies into the world, despite having gone through all of this. And I think what our kind of message, much like the book Up, is that you can go through an awful experience like this, but don't let it define you. Don't let that be the experience that is who you are. Move on, use it constructively.